Well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us in this FOSI breakout panel around education technology and mixed learning. My name's Ken Corish. I'm part of an organization here in the UK called Southwest Grid for Learning, and it's my role today to moderate the panel. So thank you very much for joining us. You've probably heard this a lot since your sessions in the conference so far, but we are obviously in unprecedented times. You know, since March of this year, we've seen national, regional, state restrictions and lockdowns that have caused disruption to many established regime and protocols, you know, at home, in the workplace, but also in education. And we've also seen the resultant rush towards the adoption of technology for relying on to be able to continue work patterns, leisure patterns, socializing. And these are not just an issue for education to deal with. These are societal changes. You know, if we look at recent data from July 2020 as a result of the first set of restrictions, this is from the Global Web Index COVID multi-market study, which looked at 16 to 64-year-olds from a quite large sample of countries, including the US. These are percentages that show the amount of time more that we are engaging with different technologies. So the biggest was 54% of us. 54% of us are now watching shows and film streams. We're becoming a much broader Netflix culture. If you remember how popular Tiger King was on Netflix, it cast your mind back to those days at the beginning of lockdown. 43% social media, 42% of us messaging, 35% gaming. Interestingly, 16% of us now are creating and crafting stuff ourselves and uploading it onto video sites. In the US specifically, we've seen these different areas in terms of growth. So we've seen growth around things like food delivery and social media engagement, but there's been an explosion in the following technologies: video chat conferencing, shopping, online healthcare, entertainment, and a slowdown in mobility, travel, so all of those Uber sites we used to access, real estate, and travel and hospitality. Historically in education, education's a well-established, intransigent legacy set of protocols, and it was a model born of need. Well, needs change. How prepared is the current ecosystem to harness a new approach to teaching and learning? How can we learn from previous initiatives? And are we prepared in terms of knowledge, skills, behaviors, and attitudes? Well, to explore these questions, we're fortunate enough to have our FOSI expert panel with us. Welcome. Let's have some introductions. Kerry, could you begin, please? Just introduce yourself and a little bit about your work.
Sure. Thanks for having me here today, Ken. I'm looking forward to being a part of this conversation. My name is Kerry Gallagher, and I serve as Director of Education for ConnectSafely, which is an internet safety nonprofit based in Palo Alto, California. But I am currently located in my office at school because my full-time position is that I'm assistant principal for teaching and learning, which I think is really directly connected to what you just said, at a school called St. John's Preparatory School in Danvers, Massachusetts. So I'm actually on the East Coast. If I look outside my door, we have snowflakes. But yeah, I'm actually at school in my office. I think I wanted to make sure that I was really painting a picture for what we're doing here at St. John's and at ConnectSafely. So firstly, at ConnectSafely, we produce really helpful guides for parents and educators for navigating the latest and best technology systems, and also to promote wellness and health among families and with students and teachers as they're using technology. We really promote the use of technology. We just want people to use it well. So we're not in the business of asking folks to abstain at all. But we want people to use it in a way that's safe, secure, and healthy. In my role at St. John's, we are here on campus. We have classrooms full of students, and we also have students who are participating from home. So our version of a hybrid model is that we're running a synchronous class schedule with 50% of our students attending class from home at the same time as their classmates who are in the same classroom physically. So you have 2 days attending class from home and 2 days attending class at school, and so on and so forth. But you are a teacher is teaching at the same time students who appear, on that grid on the flat panel at the back of the room while teaching their students here. And so our teachers have had to relearn different ways of teaching. And my role is to provide, number one, the systems, and number two, the professional learning, and number three, the one-on-one on-demand coaching that our teachers need to feel successful while they're doing that. And so it's an exciting time. It's an overwhelming time, but I honestly wouldn't change the fact that I have my feet in both places, in a place that's able to really advocate for policy from that national nonprofit perspective, and also be able to do some real work on the ground here at a school every single day.
Kerry, thank you ever so much. No small job, that. Absolutely. Thank you. Andrea.
Hello, my name is Andrea Cook. I am from Kansas City, Missouri. I work for Kansas City Public School District in Kansas City, Missouri. I am a coordinator of digital learning, and I am 1/3 of the team, the digital learning team. I work with Jeremy Davis and Joe Jarrett. Those are my two counterparts. And our goal is to make sure that teachers can integrate technology into their classroom through curriculum and through tools to make sure that every student can access what they need to access in order to be successful. We've been in this work for the last 3 years, and we put together a great plan that is backed by research in order to make sure that we were prepared for students and teachers to teach and learn using technology, not knowing that a pandemic was coming, but we actually prepared within these last 3 years for this process. And we put this plan together by first looking at different tech models. And after looking at the different tech models, we actually did research on how this tech model could be used and how teachers were using technology within their classrooms. We took that data and created an online learning modules for our teachers so that they could learn at any time, any place. We call it like PD in your PJs. And so basically, we came up with a roadmap for teachers, and it really went over very well before COVID, and then during COVID, it became mandatory. So love to talk more about that.
Andrea, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Julian from the UK. Julian, would you like to introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about your work?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the invitation to join the panel. Thanks everyone for joining. My name's Julian Mcdougall. I'm a professor and head of a research centre at Bournemouth University called the Centre for Excellence in Media Practice. We were previously funded by the UK government, but that money has run out, so it's my job to run the centre without that funding. We have, over the last few years, delivered a kind of a range of research projects for a number of funders. Government funders, UK and US. We've just delivered a project for the US Embassy in London around media education, digital and media literacies. And we also run a large doctoral program for teachers. So we have lots of teachers working with us who are doing insider research in their classrooms, often working with media technology. And like other members of the panel, we were doing this work pre-COVID, but COVID has, sharpened the lens on all this stuff. And I guess one of the things I'll be hoping to contribute to the panel, whether helpful or not, is that we really, when we do the research, find how complex this is and how difficult it is to deliver a toolkit or a manual or a how-to guide. because every teacher, every student, every parent is engaging and reacting with technology in a different way, and actually we tend to project all of our anxieties and concerns and identities around everything else onto the way we engage with technology, and our research has really shown us that. So we're in the space. We've done quite a lot of research, but we're often asking more questions than giving answers, I'm afraid.
Thank you so much, Julian. And I'm sure that research is going to be able to underpin and respond to some of the questions we've got coming up. So thank you for joining us. Dewayne, something about your work, please, and where you are.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dwayne Mcclary.
You're on mute, I think. Yeah.
Oh.
No, you're fine. Sorry to interrupt. Dwayne, we've got a little bit of problem about picking up your sound there. Did hear you for a moment, and then you disappeared. That's it. That's it. Let's go with that. Fantastic. Oh, phew.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dwayne Mcclary. I'm located in Washington, D.C. I work for an organization called Digital Promise. With Digital Promise, we are an organization where I work for within Digital Promise, we have an organization called the League of Innovative Schools, which is the flagship of Digital Promise. And we have a little over 8 years that we've grown into a robust and dynamic network of about 114 of the most innovative school districts across the United States. We're in 34 states, representing a little over 4.6 million students. Our league members are committed to working together to improving student outcomes and to solve challenges that face our K-12 students through innovative strategies and learning technologies, and most importantly, R&D, the research that we do for our schools. The League of Innovative Schools, we work to validate, champion, and scale innovative learning opportunities to advance equity and excellence for all learners. As director, I lead a network of school districts where I advance the mission of looking at design, validating, championing, and scaling these innovative practices alongside practitioners, but also alongside our corporate partners and research. So super excited to be here to share a little bit about what we've done within Digital Promise and the League of Innovative Schools. And just recently got off a road trip to visiting a few of our schools. So happy to share what I saw through this pandemic.
Completely. Thank you so much, Dewayne. And what an amazing panel we have for you to be able to answer some of your questions a little bit later on. But I'm going to start just with an open question to any of you, really, just so that the people who are viewing this panel can all get up to speed. We create a level playing field. So when we talk about remote learning, or indeed mixed learning, what do we mean? What does it include? What might it look like?
So what I've seen across the league and across the country, remote learning or mixed learning is a combination of synchronous and asynchronous learning, where students are able to, one, be a part of an online platform with all of their peers and teachers, guiding them through a process together, providing skills and reinforcement. But then there's also a portion of the learning where students do it on their own, on days where they are able to go on a platform and pull the content that the teachers have provided. That's kind of what we're seeing. We're also seeing a lot of our districts do hybrid models where some kids go into the building maybe 2 to 3 days a week. And then other kids, they take a break in the middle of the day and then they go asynchronous and where they learn on their own from the platform, from the content that they may have learned in the building. So that's kind of where we're seeing kids right now for the league.
Have any of you seen any different models that add to that at all in terms of this asynchronous, synchronous idea?
It's been the same for us.
Yeah. Julian?
Well, I think, I agree entirely with that definition, but I think there's a kind of a series of subcategories as well. And I think they each present challenges for us in the UK, the second lockdown is much more complicated than the first, because in the second lockdown, schools are open, but within schools, lots of year groups are at home, including my son who's at home at the moment because of positive cases in the school. So that creates, the hybrid model is like a hybrid within a hybrid, because not even the whole school is adopting the same approach, not even the same year group necessarily adopting the same approach. But I think what I would say is that the biggest difference it makes is whether, you're signed up to this or whether you're being made to do it, in the sense that, we teach online courses where all of our students have engaged with the program as an online course. So we're not being virtual because there's nothing to be virtual to, or whatever the right phrase is, because the online space is the space. Whereas, at the moment, lots of people are in a situation where they're trying to replicate something that's in our mind, the classroom, the seminar room, and we're trying to do it online, and that becomes more complicated through the hybridity as well.
And is that what the rest of you found, that actually this isn't trying to replicate the physical experience of being in a school? It's very different, isn't it? And whilst the outcomes, we might be aiming for the same outcomes, the ecosystems are different and the challenges are different. Have any of you found that? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Our challenge here in Kansas City has been making sure that all students have access to the internet. And I should say high-speed access to the internet. We had to give out over 7,000 hotspots to our students. We have 14,000 kids in our district, and half of them needed a hotspot. Whereas our suburban counterparts may have, I believe the numbers were 700 out of about the same number of students. So we have a huge problem with access. And not only that, when we provide these hotspots and we're having students work online, the hotspots don't provide enough bandwidth for them to actually complete the assignments that they need to complete. So we really have an issue with access.
Yeah.
I think tied to that is, it's access, number one, so that you can actually access your education, which in the United States is actually a federal right that's protected by law. So some of our students are not able to access like a fundamental right that we've agreed is something that is everyone has a right to, because they don't have the infrastructure available in the area where they live. But in addition, it's my opinion that they should, number one, have access, but number two, have access in a way that is secure and safe. I mean, we're talking about children, right? So, they're interacting with adults who have had background checks and have been cleared year after year and have engaged in training. Has access to our children now because they're engaging over these wireless networks.
Absolutely, yeah.
We certainly don't want. So I think, number one, Andrea, I really applaud your district for getting all of those hotspots out there. And I'm sure you did all the work around making sure they were secure. And that's one of the mitigating one of the limitations to definitely the quality of the bandwidth that you can actually put on that hotspot too.
And I think we'll talk about safeguarding just a little bit later on. But you're actually, Kerry, you've led us into a really interesting point. So for each of you, if you were giving advice to somebody who had either set this up or was part way through it, and you had to pick out the features of what makes a good, effective online teaching or learning experience, what would be the key points? What would be the top 5 things? So we've talked about having technology and connectivity and access, because obviously without that we can't do it. But in terms of how it's set up, what would be your key points that you'd advise on and say, actually, you need these things in place as a bare minimum if you really want to make this work?
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to that. So before I joined Digital Promise, I was also director of educational technology for DC Public Schools in Washington, DC. And we kind of delve into this, and we're also delving into this with the league. So in order for me, the right components and ingredients to make this effective and work is, one, kids must have access. They must have access to not just a hotspot. We're looking for pure broadband internet access, because these hotspots, like Andrea was saying, is, bandwidth is running out quickly. So how do we get the FCC, which we're working with and advocating for? We have a campaign called Connect Kids Now. How do we get the FCC to allow schools to be able to pay for this access at home? Because we don't know how long this pandemic will last, and we definitely know that this may not be the last one. The other piece is professional development and curriculum. How do we ensure that our teachers are prepared to be able to utilize this platform? So when I think of digital equity, I think of digital equity of having a three-prong approach. One is access, two is curriculum and professional development, and three is digital literacy and etiquette. Like, how do we ensure that kids understand how to utilize these tools? So, those are the big components. But the other big piece is how do we support our students socially, emotionally, because this is a huge change for our kids. Like, they're confined to an area, or they're used to face-to-face instruction. They're used to being around their peers. I have 3 kids, and they're 13, 11, and 7. And I will tell you, it has taken a toll on them, where we're looking at, how do we get them help to support them socially, emotionally. So I think those are the various components: the access, the curriculum, the professional development, the digital literacy, digital etiquette, and
the well-being of children. Yeah. Do any of you see any additional points there for something to become effective, or what you'd look for in an effective online learning teaching ecosystem?
I would say relationships. I was in a teacher's classroom last week or a couple of weeks ago, and she was having a student that was really having a hard time actually accessing everything. He knew how to access everything, but he didn't have his camera on, and he wasn't really a part of the class. And she was like, I just don't know how to get him to become a part of the class. I'm like, well, let's see what we can do about building the relationship. So what we did was, he had a picture, his profile picture was up, but everything else was grayed out. But the picture was of some Air Jordan 1s. So I was like, wow, I see your Air Jordan 1s. Are you wearing those right now? And he pepped up, and right then he started just talking. And I said, oh, so you can actually, access what I'm trying to tell you. If I tell you, he's like, oh yeah, sure. And he talked. Yeah. And it's just about the relationship. It's so huge right now.
And in terms of those relationships as well, where do families fit into this as well? Because we've talked about getting staff professionally up to speed. We've talked about children and making sure they're safe. And we make big assumptions too, don't we, about children, in terms of, well, kids are just so good at tech. Of course they're going to slip into this dead easily, but there are lots and lots of huge gaps in children's understanding around technology that it's our role to fill. But then you've got families, and families, I guess, are an important part of the whole educational process anyway, and very hard, even traditionally within the physical environment, it's hard to engage some families. Where do you see families sitting into these regimes?
I think that school family partnerships are something that I've become more passionate about than ever during this situation, both because I am a parent, like Dewayne mentioned, of school-age children, and also because one of my jobs in my role is not just to make sure the teachers know how to use the tools and the students know how, but that the parents feel comfortable in guiding their children. So one of the things that we've done in our school is I've provided 2 to 3 parent programs, either during the day or in the evenings, for parents to access on various topics. And some of those topics have been, for instance, the docudrama that just came out from Netflix on the social dilemma. That's a really hot topic among our parents. So let's talk about it as the adults who partner around your children's well-being, right? And I think we also, I'm running a webinar tomorrow at noon on optimizing the home learning experience. And we're going to talk about things like, how do you set up your space when you're learning? Do you, where are your schedules posted in your home? What does the lighting look like so that you feel comfortable appearing on camera so you can engage more with your classmates and have a more social experience along with your academics? Are you having trouble with connectivity? Who should you reach out to if that happens? I mean, all these basics. But I wanted to say, you know, as Andrea and Dwayne were talking, as the elements of a high quality learning experience, those are not the elements of a high quality learning experience. Those are the basics so that you can have a learning experience.
Yep.
We haven't even talked about what the lesson design should look like or the interactions with the teacher or classmates should look like to make it actually a high quality education. Like, we haven't even gotten to that part of the conversation yet. So I'd love to get there at some point, because there are some teachers who are there, who are doing a really phenomenal job already. And like, we should not forget to pay attention to that while we're also making sure that equity is addressed so that the whole system can continue to move forward.
So in talking about these things, sorry, Dwayne, I know you were just going to say something there, but go on. Sorry, you carry on, and then I'll add my observation.
No, I just wanted to say, like, it's important that most of our districts in the league are doing some type of like parent university where they're doing to, you know, train the trainer models, because parents are being thrust now into supporting their kids, sitting with their kids. Like I have like I said, 7-year-old, I have to sit beside him to make sure that he's doing the right thing, clicking the right button. Also, you know, developing tech support, because when you run into issues, like if a kid can't access the instruction, you know, teacher could put all this great work in, but if they can't access it, it doesn't matter. So how do we help parents understand the technical issues, you know, developing like a help desk? So a lot of districts have to dig deep and into their pockets to develop these things to best support these parents. But I think all districts know that without the parents, you know, this will not support or work.
Parents are that, you know, so one thing we've learned that if you want children to do anything well, you need to model it well yourself in terms of how you demonstrate it. If you want good writers, children have got to experience good writing, you know, by well-established and recognized authors. And I guess it's the same for those sort of things around technology as well. But Julian, within your research that you talked about, in terms of your research, how does your research reflect on some of these issues we've talked about? You know, you talked about the disparity in need across the population in terms of the models we adapt. What's your research found?
I mean, just going back to the issue with parents, I mean, one of the projects we did with Samsung was called Digital Families, and you know, it was one of those projects where there's to be fair to Samsung, they were very receptive to the complexity of it, but you know, it started out with a very straightforward thing. We're going to build a digital classroom. We're going to build a community space. We're going to bring parents, teachers, and children together and use the Samsung technology, you know, to enhance the kind of engagement with school curriculum. And of course, what happens quite soon is that all those access issues that have already been discussed come to the surface. But also what I think the research shows around parents is, and I mentioned it earlier, the way that we tend to project onto our engagement with technology, all the other things around the kind of emotive identity politics of parenthood that kind of come through. But what we found was, and other projects have found the same, is that there's not really a language for parents to engage with technology actively. You know, parents are very often in the role of kind of consumers of technology. So they need to provide technology for their children, and then they need to, you know, work out what software is appropriate, work out what video games are age appropriate, and all the rest of it. But you know, in terms of education offline in the classroom, parents are often very articulate and very heavily invested in responding to schools and responding to teachers about what they think should be happening in classrooms, you know, what they think should be happening at home, what the homework should be like. And when education moves online and we're reliant on these tools and technologies, you know, there's not really a kind of language for that kind of more agentive engagement. So we've found, I mean, everything you've said about, you know, we could call it cultural capital, that kind of parental confidence, not only in providing the tech, but being able to be there and around it and understanding it is one thing. But also, you know, how do you articulate back that you're not happy with the way that your kids are using Microsoft Teams, that you think there could be a better way of doing this, where we're not reliant on certain kind of, you know, intermediaries from kind of big tech corporations. You know, I think that's the next space, a kind of community parental discourse around this is going to be longer term. What do we want?
Yeah.
And how do we want to be using technology for learning rather than just accepting, you know, a kind of business model that might not actually have public sector education, you know, at its ethos.
So in terms of this new environment, we've talked about the way the structure might change, the way we access the tools that we use, who's involved. What about the curriculum? Does the curriculum stay the same within these, or does it have to be adapted, changed, massaged to fit what is essentially a new way of working, a new way of communicating, in fact, a new way of seeing things in many cases, you know, to move away from this Victorian ideal of books and even to a certain extent just, you know, worksheets and you know, simple single devices on desks. All of a sudden, all this stuff's joining up. So how does the curriculum change, and does it need to change? And have any of you worked on programs that have designed curricula for this? It's a free-for-all, folks. You can just say what you need.
One thing that we've learned is that there are different ways to teach the curricula that we're teaching only in one way for a very long time, because we've been forced to adjust the way we teach, and we've found out that we can do it in these different ways. So I think one thing that may shift is that we may offer learning in different ways for our students after everybody keeps saying after all of this is over, but as Dwayne said, I'm not convinced it'll ever be over and go back. But I think this forced shift is going to lead to a longer term shift in the different ways that we offer learning to happen to our students. We curriculum and more in changing curriculum. I have some ideas too, but I certainly want to let the other panelists share.
I was really sad about the pandemic, really, but I was really happy about the pandemic too, because now we have a chance to actually change how things are supposed to, how students learn. For example, I love to read, there's a book called The Innovator's Mindset by George Couros. I really like that book. And the reason I liked it is because one of the things he talked about was we basically are doing, you know, we're teaching kids how to be assembly workers in education now with our current curriculums. Whereas now we have a chance to, I really don't want to say that word, but I'm gonna have to say rethink or transform education, because it's all became, to me, more like McDonald's. It's just branded now, but it's so important for us to, I think, bring students in and ask them, what do they want? What do they want to learn, and let them be a part of the process of creating the curriculum as well.
Yeah, I think this process has taught us a lot. I think Julian, Kerry, and Andrea, we've probably been preaching to the choir for a long time, and this pandemic has really shown, like, oh, what you were talking about is not crazy. It's like, this is what we've been talking about. Like, this is where we wanted to go, and I've always been reminded by my pastor, like, you know, there's a bright side somewhere. And, you know, even though this pandemic has really turned our lives upside down, however, there are bright spots to it that we're learning, like, oh, education should not be the same after this is over. So yes, curriculum will have to change. Some districts have been working at this for a while. You know, how do students, one, see themselves within the curriculum? So is the curriculum culturally responsive? But two, is your curriculum digitized? Just because kids have devices and hotspots now in their homes, what does the curriculum look like? Does it even fit the model of it being online? How do we help teachers then? Because as you know, there's so many different educational tools out there. Which one is the right one? So now you're having teachers now thinking, oh, like, I have a plethora of online tools. which one works best for our kids? And I think that's where the research piece comes into play. How do we support that? But how do we help teachers think as researchers? Or do we open the box and let students just be creative, create their artifacts? I don't care what type of program you use, just that you have fulfilled the content. Like now I'm talking about competency-based learning, but I'm not going to preach on that today.
It's really interesting because I want to come to Julian because I'd like him to give a little bit of an idea just as balanced here for the UK perspective, because and he's laughing because I think it's slightly different for us here, because the question is, what are the expectations, Julian, that this becomes the norm in the UK? What is pressure is on schools to carry on with this post-COVID?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to bring it down to a miserable kind of, although to be honest, it's a global pandemic, so I think we can be miserable about it, right?
Yeah.
But the positive thing I would say is that here's an opportunity to think about curriculum in what I would call a more dynamic and a less static space. Because as you move into these kind of remote schools, you can't cling to this idea of summative assessment, retrospectively, exams. So there's yes, you're right, everybody. There's an opportunity here to take some of the pedagogic principles and the more excitement kind of curriculum design work that we've probably all been advocating and seize this moment to make it happen. But oh my word, in the UK, there was that opportunity, and what has happened is the government here cannot even feed children over Christmas. It took a Premier League footballer to campaign to government to extend free school meals so that children have had enough food to eat, never mind learn on devices. Secondly, they failed to put laptops in the hands of the poorest children. So in most schools across the country, something like a third of the kids aren't even online. And time and time again, they've had opportunities. And what they've done is they've outsourced contracts to companies where they may or may not have friends for, appallingly mismanaged initiatives. And so I would say I agree with everyone on the panel that here was an opportunity. If one good thing could come out of COVID, it was more equality, more engagement, a more level playing field, and a chance to really rethink the way in which we work, the way in which we do education in the country. But oh my God, how this government has refused to do that.
And that's got to be led from the top. Has it not? The people in charge need to understand that, because it doesn't always filter down, does it, Dewayne?
Yeah,
I asked him just at the wrong moment, didn't I? Oh man, he's back again. You're back. Yeah.
I'm sorry. As you can see, our broadband does not work well in the U.S. So we have students in the U.S. that are struggling with the same thing also. So let's not paint a pretty picture for the U.S. Like almost 30 to 40 million students, and most of them who are Black and brown do not have internet access in the United States. Mm-hmm. However, I think we are working towards that. What I have seen, however, is districts, not the government, districts and partners stepping up and taking the reins and helping get these kids access. Now, can it be sustainable for districts to continue this for another year? I don't think so. But there needs to be some type of approach federally to how do we support, or even if we come together, bring organizations together to help fund this, like how can we do this collectively and not separate? Like we cannot do this in silos. Like that's what we're trying to do at Digital Promise. How do we get everyone on the same page to support and do what's right by students?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to come in because I realize we're running out of time, and these conversations have been fascinating. So before I just come on to safeguarding, just an open question to the group. Do we need to worry about screen time as much as we worried about it prior to the pandemic?
I think we do. Julian's shaking his head no. Disagreement. Here we go. So I think we do in the way that I think we need to tell parents it's okay to be worried about your kids. It's okay to be concerned about screen time. I know that with my younger one, especially in Dewayne, you have kids about the same age. I see a difference in her when she has more screen time versus less screen time in her patience, her personality, her ability to navigate her relationships, all of those things. So I think what we need to do is enhance our education about screen time, and that it's not all created equal, that there are certain practices that are sort of best practices around screen time. And there are things that you can do to mitigate the cognitive and emotional impact of screen time, like eliminating blue light, reducing, like not making all learning time actually on Zoom, looking at, moving heads, because there's research tied to the impact of that. So I think we should be talking about screen time, but it isn't all or nothing, right? It's a more nuanced conversation about screen time that many of us who have worked in this area for a long time have been having for a long time, but let's make it a more public conversation.
Yeah,
Any other views on that? Yeah,
I will say, so I will say with screen time for my kids, like for me, it's a parenting decision. Because when I think of screen time, do we also count the TV? Do we also count their iPhone, their iPad? Like kids were doing this before. However, one thing I love about my kids' school is that they have movement breaks. Like they're not on the screen all day. Like we went and pick up packets for kids, like for PE. They had balls in there, they had jump ropes. So like they actually stop and say, we're stopping for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Go outside. Take your ball, bounce it this many times, record it. So like building in those movement breaks has been great. But as a parent, I have systems here in my home where I lock down the internet after a certain hour and I can limit them, how much time they spend on their cell phone.
Quite
so
right. You pay for it. It's yours. My house, my rules. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And I hope it's important that, I hope parents don't get the notion that this is what kids did when they were in school. No, this was not what they did in school. They weren't on screens all day. However, with this pandemic, it's a little different because that's the only means of modes that we're able to communicate and provide instruction.
Yes. Julian, you were shaking your head when we were talking around screen time. It's a bit of an odd argument at the moment.
It's the objective. I mean, I don't disagree with anything that Kerry or Dwayne have said whatsoever. So I was shaking my head at the very mention, and I think it's because it's the wrong debate. I think it's about screen engagement. Because the difference between, you don't need me to tell you the difference between somebody connecting with somebody on the other side of the world, having a meaningful conversation for really good reasons, either because it's a family member or because they're doing some research, and then playing a video game we might not approve of for 20 hours straight is huge. And so the idea of screen time, neither worry about or not, is I think the wrong way of thinking about the argument. And I would also say, there is a huge economic, model that's all about screen time. So I think kind of blaming the consumer or blaming the person who's engaging in that, rather than looking at
it's hard it's hard to measure them against it. Yeah.
But I don't disagree with anything anyone said about those issues about what people worry about.
And some interesting research that's out there for those of you who might be aware of it is Andrew Shabilsky's work at the Oxford Internet Institute around peer reviewing research at screen time, this so-called screen time research across the world, and drawing some conclusions from that. We were sort of edging through well-being onto safeguarding. Are there any unique, I think, Kerry, you mentioned some of them before, are there any unique challenges using online technologies in this way that impact or get us to rethink how we manage safeguarding, not only in terms of prevention, but also perhaps how these systems can enhance, in a way, some safeguarding protocols, I think, by the sheer nature that they're communication systems. Do any of you have any views on that in terms of, we're at a FOSI conference, so safeguarding is important.
So I think the most important is the design in which you're developing it. So first I'll say we must ensure that online learning does not look the same as brick and mortar learning. Like that doesn't work. So that's first and most important. I want to say that. The other piece is looking legally, which we've had a lot of our league districts look at it legally. How do we enforce making sure kids share their cameras? Like, is that a thing? But then also, how do we ensure now that we're providing internet access, hotspots, computers into the homes of the kids, like legally are the school districts liable? And I think yes. So there should be safeguards put in place of filtering, making sure kids aren't able to go to inappropriate websites. Maybe having to control the device, only curriculum, content can be uploaded and pushed to the device. So there's so many different approaches that districts take. So yeah, I think there is it is a very important imperative that school districts do ensure that they're safeguarding their kids, but also are they teaching them the digital literacy and the digital etiquettes of the utilizing of the device, like understanding that all caps means yelling, understanding that you don't share your password with anyone, even if it's your best friend. You don't go into private chat rooms with individuals you don't know, or even individuals depending on your district's policy. So like there's so many, for our districts, like this going live has really turned their legal world upside down.
I bet, yes. I was going to ask about that. So synchronous, particularly young people who may use live video or I'll call it camera on, camera off. What do we think about the issues around that? Because we haven't got 30 children in front of us in a room. We've got 30 children spread across a wide area, all in their own rooms. Are there any advice for those around when running synchronous sessions about camera on, camera off? I'm thinking more around contextual clues around a child that might suggest certain things or give away certain things.
Yeah, so I think number one, it's really important for schools to be proactive about this and reach out to families and students about the spaces that are available to them so that they can engage. And if the family says that there isn't a private space or there isn't a space that allows for the child to engage comfortably, then the school needs to work with that family to figure out how to make that possible. And that means schools have to get creative, which, by the way, that's what we're doing. We're getting creative, so we can handle this, right? These aren't impossible things. Those are examples of, if a district is mostly remote, maybe we can provide spaces for those children, on our campuses that are basically empty right now, that are still safe for them to go to. Maybe we can work with the families to build like booths, learning booths for their children that they can have in their homes that have the lighting and the seating and everything that they need that can fit into a corner of a shared living room or something like that. Like there's none of this is impossible, but there needs to be outreach, and families need to feel comfortable asking for the support from their local schools. And then the schools need the time, the space, and the funding to be able to develop these creative solutions and then share them. So all of it is possible. I do think it's really important for children to be able to have their cameras on during certain learning activities so that the teachers can see their faces as they're learning, because those are important cues that teachers are trained to gather as part of the learning process. But doesn't mean that they need to be on camera all of the time. So I think that's another thing, is to establish norms with teachers and students and families about when camera on is appropriate, when camera off is okay. This is just like the screen time conversation. This isn't all or nothing. There are times when it's important and others when it's not, and everyone needs to be on the same page about it.
Dwayne, and if you see any other unique safeguarding challenges in this, or I'm just aware of the time actually.
I'm not compared to others on the panel, I'm really not qualified to talk as much about this. I'm not an expert on those kind of direct safeguarding issues. A plug-in for, critical media literacy education, because
thank you.
If we broaden out the idea of safeguarding, in terms of I refer to it as the difference between giving someone a fish and teaching them to fish, in terms of, when you encounter technology and when you encounter kind of ethical challenges around technology, whether that's, who owns content, whether you're being manipulated, whether your data is being used for bad purposes, or whether it's a safeguarding issue more directly, you just are more likely to make the right decision if you've had a sustained critical thinking media literacy education of some kind. In the UK, that's very difficult, because it's not something that it's easy to convince policymakers about. But sometimes there's a great irony in that you kind of get, you've got this subject media studies, which is kind of derided and not taken very seriously. And then the same people that deride it say, if only there was something we could do in schools to help young people be more critical about media and information. I would just say broaden it out, look for the preventative stuff as well. But I'm not in the same space as the other panelists in terms of those direct issues.
No, I completely agree. It's something that we haven't teased out as much as we should around media literacy. I was sort of suggesting that within the curriculum redesign, that actually if you're going to ask children to walk on the moon, you have to teach them how to walk on the moon and what to look out for. Okay, so one last question, and then we'll take a few questions, if we may, from the group who are our audience. Is this here to stay now? Has this changed things? Or post-COVID, are we all going back to normal? What do we think?
I don't think we're going to go back to normal. When I did my road trip, I asked teachers and administrators this, like, what's one thing you would like to maintain after, if COVID was able to be over tomorrow? And from teachers, they said they would love to maintain the grace that they're given, the ability to fail forward. And having students fail forward. So that was very important. Students were saying that their ability to be able to learn at my own pace, the ability to learn what I want to learn, that was exciting. And for administrators, it was being able to reimagine and redesign what schools look like. Like we're reimagining what our school strategic plan looks like for the next 5 years. Like our spaces are going to look different. Like we're not going to be putting kids in rows of desks. Like it's going to be, the seating and space is going to look a lot different for our students.
Yeah.
Every inch of the building will be a learning space. So that's what we learned.
I'm going to have to ask some questions now because I've been looking at the wrong feed. I've been watching what everyone's saying rather than what Erin's telling me to ask. So bear with me, some quick answers here. One of the first questions, your panel has alluded to one of the major conflicts educators are facing. Moving the classroom experience online requires change. How do we teach our communities to embrace this shift? That's from Dean Whitfield. Just very quickly, what are the quick wins around that? Dean,
Andrea,
you've stunned them all.
Andrea, I think you need to talk about PD in your PJs. I think that because we can have a clever name for that, but I think that's been a big
well, it really the PD in your PJs really helps because basically what we did, we came up with like a plan for teachers to learn no matter what their level was. So if you were new to, let's say, Google Classroom or what have you, you would start out really small, just kind of learning, where the enter button is and working your way up. And so we came up with this plan, and what we did, we kind of gamified it. I put a picture here, there. And once we gamified it, so each of these sections will get you a sticker to get to the basics of something. So here's like Google Basics. The first thing you'll learn is how to use a Chrome browser, and then the Google Drive, and Google Docs, and then tech integration. And then we'll give you a sticker to say, hey, congratulations, you got the basics of everything. So gamifying it and letting teachers do it whenever they want it to has worked out very well.
Thank you.
For our teachers.
Thank you.
And then when you gamify it, they kind of like, they're competitive. So they start to go, hey, I got the basics, and you get the intermediate. And it's really worked out really well. And we had put that plan in place in August of last year. And at that point, we were having less than 1% of our teachers to go to our in-person professional development. But what happened once we put that in, it went up to about 28% of teachers who actually went in and started to do these modules pre-COVID. So once COVID hit, which worked out, because we already had this plan in place, we just said, hey, just go ahead and start doing your modules. And they started doing their modules. So it was spring break. So once spring break was over, teachers were ready to go.
Thank you.
And so it just made it, it was seamless.
Thank you.
And we just, yes, it really helped. And then we have teachers that were new teachers who were pretty good with tech, and then we had older teachers who had that pedagogy knowledge, and we kind of put them together and let them kind of work together to build professional
Yeah,
basically.
blended professional development is what we're talking about. We've got a question from Cindy Comrack, who says parents complain that they're navigating through too many different platforms for one child to make sense of their child's virtual education. What are your thoughts? It was interesting because I'd written down before, the complaints that you might get. Well, why my children on broader commercial mechanisms? What about the privacy? Where's all their data going? What about copper?
Yeah.
How would you respond to that?
Oh, I'll respond really quickly. We have our tech director is so serious in regards to making sure that everything is COPA, FERPA, everything is aligned. And sometimes we clash in regards to that because I'm like, but we need to use, and he's like, no, we can't use, and I get it. I may not like it, but I understand how important it is, for everyone's data to be safe. And with all of these tools from these big companies, it's really making it hard for us to keep our students safe. So I really appreciate his efforts.
Okay, just one last question for everyone, just to wrap up our session. So we've talked a lot about the technical impact. We've talked about the challenges to make these new environments or these already developed environments work effectively. But what about the little people themselves who are being asked to sort of being brought into these and asked to change the things that they're used to, whether they're 5 years old or whether they're 18 years old, it's a big change for them. So Michelle asked a really interesting question that I'd like to wrap up with. So to whom does the responsibility of social and emotional learning fall in these virtual learning environments? If schools don't have proper resources when children are in the building, how can they be relied upon to monitor children's emotional issues and health within those environments? Do any of you have a view?
So I'll say this, being a former teacher, my wife who is a teacher now, teachers have always done it. We've always been the socio-emotional champion of the classroom. However, now with the pandemic, with everything that is being placed upon the shoulders of teachers, it is becoming a little bit much to really do the true work of a socio-emotional, a counselor or something like that. So I think there needs to be supports put in place at every school building level or district level, that where a teacher may see some type of issue, it should be immediately trigger some type of process where there's supports put in place. However, there should also be the folks who are in charge of the socio-emotional work should be also doing some type of activities, pushing activities virtually with the classroom or students that they're targeting, so that they can ensure that they're catching any kids that may have fallen through the cracks.
And I would say this is part and parcel with the camera on, camera off conversation, because in order for a teacher to assess the wellness of a child, the teacher needs to be able to hear and see the child. So they're not separate conversations like, oh, all cameras off so that kids have privacy, but teachers are responsible for SEL. You can't have it both ways. That's why there needs to be a balance, and each of these conversations shouldn't happen on its own without talking about the impacts on other things. So in addition to, because that's how teachers have assessed SEL before, by the child's mannerisms and ability to engage and their expressions and their body language in the classroom. So if we don't have them in the classroom, we need to be able to see them in some way so that we can assess their wellness there. And then if there is a concern, I agree with Dwayne, there needs to be a process, and social workers, mental health counselors, whomever is on staff needs to get a referral. This is what I saw. This is what I'm worried about. This is what I tried, and then there's a partnership, and they just loop in the parent. That's, the teacher's concerned. What are you seeing? Is there support we can offer? And then sometimes you find out the child is already in counseling and they're already being addressed, and you're just seeing it in a different way. But sometimes you find out that you can offer the support that family didn't know that they had access to. But yeah.
I'm sorry, Kerry.
No, go for
it. What we have as a district, we have a tool within our technology that looks at what students are researching. So if there's a student that's researching suicide, it'll send a link to our IT department to let them know, hey, this kid is starting to look at suicide, so we just got a word. One of our schools had that to be researched more than, quite often here in these last few weeks. So it let us know that we need to put some processes in place and let our SEL director know to, reach out to the students.
And that's unique, isn't it, to those electronic systems? They do provide really secure routes for disclosures and escalations to colleagues. We've reached the end of our time. We have severely ran over our time by a whole 5 minutes, but that's because of probably more me than you. Thank you so much for your contribution. The one thing I take away from this is that despite the opportunities and the technologies that we have at our disposal, they only work if the right people use them and the right teachers use them, and teachers can see the benefit of them. I saw a lovely thing just a few days ago when I was reviewing an online school, was that one teacher had just used the little polling device that they have within the tools, that when children signed on, this little polling device was anonymous and just said, "How are you feeling today?" And it had 3 or 4 levels. At the start of the lesson, that teacher then had an emotion temperature map of the class before they started. And that's nothing to do with technology. That's to do with good teaching. So perhaps, we've got a teaching profession at the moment that's never been more expert and passionate and committed. So I feel we're in good hands. Colleagues, thank you for the benefit of your viewpoints and your expertise and your wisdom. It was great meeting you all. And thank you for the 50+ people who attended. We're quite happy later on through the feed to answer any additional questions. Thank you very much for your time, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stay safe.